now is the recently, I'm telling you, the last 10 minutes, unsealed indictment against Sean Combs, and I'm going to read it for you, and I'm going to go through it with you. I am breaking this down in real time. I haven't had a lot of time to really look at this. I'll give you my initial impressions, but remember, the music mogul, artist, producer, he's been arrested out in New York City. Reporting indicates that he was taken into custody last night by federal authorities at the Park Hyatt Hotel. This apparently comes after a grand jury has indicted him, which is not surprising. This is not something that we didn't expect. There was reporting for months that the 54-year-old would be the target of a criminal investigation, and this comes after his homes in Los Angeles and Miami were raided back in March. Now, he has been hit with numerous lawsuits alleging sexual assault, sex trafficking, illegal narcotics possession, gun possession. Now, to be clear, we didn't know what the charges would be. We guessed. And it looks like our guess was right, because as Mark Agnifilio, his attorney, said to the press today and last night, they were anticipating racketeering and sex trafficking charges, and that is what we see in this grand jury indictment. It is 14 pages long. There are 3 counts. One that makes up the majority of this indictment is the racketeering enterprise. So let me go through it with you right now. Now, racketeering, and by the way, I will tell you this is similar to what we saw with R. Kelly, who, as we know, was also indicted in federal court in New York. That was the Eastern District of New York. This is the Southern District. He was ultimately convicted and sentenced to 30 years in prison. So racketeering, what we are talking about here, is a criminal enterprise. And a conspiracy to commit the racketeering statute is there's a criminal agreement, there's a number of overt acts, there's predicate crimes. So there's things that Diddy is not necessarily being charged with on an individual basis, but they make up this criminal enterprise. In other words, there's evidence that will show this is a criminal enterprise. So I'm going to go through it with you right now. Again, this is from the Southern District of New York. It says, overview, count 1, racketeering conspiracy. For decades, Sean Combs, a.k.a. Puff Daddy, P. Diddy, P.D., Love, they always use his name throughout this, the different monikers. The defendant abused, threatened, and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. To do so, Combs relied on the employees, resources, and influence of the multifaceted business empire that he led and controlled, creating a criminal enterprise whose members and associates engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other crimes, sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. A few things here. One, Sean Combs is the only one who's actually listed in this indictment. He's the only named defendant. You have to wonder if anybody else will be cooperating with the government against him. Now, I will let you know, after a brief overview of this, I have not seen the specific names of any other individuals, including the people who filed lawsuits against him. But what this does indicate is they're trying to establish that there was a criminal enterprise, and it wasn't just him, it was his associates. And he is not being charged, I should say, with federal kidnapping or arson or forced labor, but it is a component of the racketeering case. Let's move on. The defendant operated his business headquartered at various times in Manhattan, so you can see why Manhattan has jurisdiction here, and Los Angeles under a variety of United States-based corporate entities, including Bad Boy Entertainment, Combs Enterprises, and Combs Global. Corporate entities in the Combs business included, among other things, record labels, a recording studio, and they go on the different businesses that he has. At all relevant times in this indictment, Sean Combs, the defendant, engaged in a persistent and pervasive pattern of abuse toward women and other individuals. This abuse was at times verbal, emotional, physical, sexual. As part of this pattern of abuse, Combs manipulated women to participate in highly orchestrated performances of sexual activity with male commercial sex workers. By the way, that is eerily reminiscent of what we heard from the person you see right there, Cassandra Ventura. Remember, she filed a lawsuit against Combs back in November of 2023, settled the day after. She had talked about these freak-offs. She had talked about being forced to engage in these perverted sexual activities at the behest of Sean Combs. So this is kind of making this up. You wonder if she's a cooperating witness here. At times, Combs and others acting in his direction made arrangements for women and commercial sex workers to fly to Combs' location. Combs ensured participation from the women by, among other things, obtaining and distributing narcotics to them, controlling their careers, leveraging his financial support, and threatening to cut off the same and using intimidation and violence. This is, by the way, characteristic of when we talk about sex trafficking, where you are forcing or coercing or threatening someone into commercial sex activities, or you're transporting them across state lines through coercion or different methods for illegal sexual activity. And so let's continue on. Physical abuse by Sean Combs, the defendant, was recurrent and widely known. On numerous occasions from at least in or about 2009 and continuing for years, Combs assaulted women by, among other things, striking, punching, dragging, throwing objects at, and kicking them. These assaults were at times witnessed by others and included, this timing could not be better, what you're watching right now, one instance at a Los Angeles hotel in or about March 2016, which was captured on video and later publicly reported, where Combs kicked, dragged, and threw a vase at a woman as she was attempting to leave. That is Cassandra Ventura. When a member of the hotel security staff intervened, Combs attempted to bribe the staff member to ensure silence.
How do celebrities like Justin Bieber and The Rock generate hundreds of millions of dollars? It's actually not what you think. They make a special kind of money known as royalties.
My name is Christian Mickelson, and I help everyday people increase their income online. And I have to say, we're pretty darn good at it. My company is called Publishing.com, and we were just named the 19th fastest growing company in America right now. And there you can see us at number 19 on the list. And the reason we've been so successful in helping regular people make money is because we don't believe you should start your own business.
Violence. Combs' violence was also not limited to these women. It extended to his employees, witnesses to his abuse, and others. Again, I read the R. Kelly indictment before this to get a sense. These allegations are eerily similar to what he was charged with and what he was ultimately convicted with. And by the way, we were wondering about whether or not that video, which Combs, remember, he admitted it was him. He went on Instagram and said and apologized for participating in that 2016 video. He didn't deny it. And we were wondering if this would be a part of this criminal indictment, this federal criminal indictment, and clearly it is. Sean Combs, the defendant, used the Combs business, including certain employees, to carry out, facilitate, and cover up his abuse and commercial sex. That term is you're going to hear that a lot, commercial sex. Equate that almost with sex trafficking. Those employees, including security staff, household staff, personal assistants, high-ranking supervisors, and other close associates, acted as Combs' intermediaries, and their conduct was facilitated and assisted by Combs' control of the Combs business. Then it talks about the Combs enterprise, so this criminal enterprise. From at least in or about 2008, so you're going all the way back to 2008, through or on about the date of the filing of this indictment, so even to this day, the defendant and others known and unknown were members and associates of a criminal organization. Members and associates of the Combs enterprise engaged in and attempted to engage in, among other things, sex trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, coercion and enticement to engage in prostitution, narcotics offenses, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and obstruction of justice. A little bit later, you're going to see that he's also charged specifically with sex trafficking. But as I mentioned, all of these underlying alleged crimes can make up a racketeering case. They are predicate crimes of a criminal enterprise. The Combs enterprise, including its leadership, its members, and its associates, constituted an enterprise. And by the way, let me just take 1 second as I'm reading this. This is also eerily similar to the Rodney Little Rod Jones lawsuit. He was one of the first people to file a lawsuit, former producer of Sean Combs. He alleged violations of racketeering law. So he was the one who made those allegations, and again, very consistent with what we are hearing here. And again, constituted an enterprise as defined under the United States Code, and this is a group of individuals associated in fact, although not a legal entity. So you can have a criminal enterprise. It doesn't have to be Sean Combs, Inc. If you have a bunch of people, they don't have to be incorporated. It can still be a criminal enterprise. The Combs enterprise consisted of the defendant, entities within the Combs business, including but not limited to Bad Boy Entertainment,
Yo,
Combs
what?
Enterprises, and then they go through a number of different entities and people known and unknown. The Combs Enterprise
said it was
constituted an
people's
ongoing
pacemakers, too,
organization whose
like,
members
you know that-
functioned as a continuing unit for a common purpose of achieving the objectives of the Combs Enterprise. The Combs Enterprise was engaged in, and its activities affected interstate and foreign commerce. It operated in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere. A couple of things there. So now you see why this is being brought in the Southern District of New York, why they have jurisdiction. When you talk about common purpose, if you've been following us here on Law and Crime and you have been following the Young Thug trial, a racketeering case, that is the number one theme. The prosecutors in that case have been trying to establish that all of these underlying crimes were for the common purpose of furthering that gang. Here, there is a common purpose of furthering the Combs Enterprise. At all times relevant to this indictment, Sean Combs, the defendant, was the leader of the Combs Enterprise. Sean Combs, the defendant, and others known and unknown, participated in unlawful and other activities related to the conduct of the Combs Enterprise's affairs. These individuals included certain Combs business employees, such as members of Combs security staff, household staff, personal assistants, high-ranking supervisors, as well as other close associates of Combs. Now, we don't know if that's from digital evidence that they obtained. We don't know if those people around him are cooperating with the government, or we do not know whether alleged victims of Combs have, this is their perspective of who has been involved. Okay, purposes of the Combs Enterprise. The purpose of the Combs Enterprise included the following. A, operating a global business in the media, entertainment, and lifestyle industries, and talks about record labels, recording studio, alcohol, spirits business. B, preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power, reputation, and brand of Sean Combs, the defendant, as a musician, entrepreneur, and figure in the entertainment industry. Enriching members and associates of the enterprise, including its leader, Combs, and in particular those who demonstrated loyalty to Combs and willingness to conceal his crimes. Preserving, protecting, promoting, and enhancing the power of the Combs Enterprise, including the power of its leader, Combs, through violence, use of firearms, threats of violence, coercion, verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse. I know I said this a lot, but I'm just going to say it one more time. This is all consistent with what has been alleged in the multiple lawsuits that he has currently been facing, whether it is Cassandra Ventura, whether it's Joy Dickerson-Neal, whether it's Jane Doe, whether it is Rodney Jones. So again, this is not entirely out of left field with what has been asserted against him. Another purpose of the enterprise, fulfilling the personal desires of Combs, particularly those related to Combs' sexual gratification, including the exploitation of women and the use of commercial sex workers, enabling Combs and other members and associates of the Combs Enterprise to engage in unlawful acts of violence, including sexual violence, sex.
Come on, vamos.
Hola, padres. ¿Quieres que tus chiquis se mantengan conectados a su cultura? Con Dora, tus hijos aprenderán a valorar su herencia.
Sana, sana, bolita de rana.
Verán la importancia de la familia
You're such a good big sister, Dora.
y practicarán su español.
¡Despacio! ¡Rápido!
Haz que tus hijos aprendan a la manera de Dora.
¡Perfecto!
Y mira el nuevo show Dora, de lunes a viernes a las 11 en Nickelodeon y disponible ahora en Paramount Plus.
Back in 2022, I lost two very important people in my life. Big figures. It really wasn't until February of this year that I finally gave therapy a chance. And the cool thing here is I actually use BetterHelp to do it. In fact, I still use it weekly to this day. And I gotta tell you,
Trafficking, forced labor, interstate transportation for purposes of prostitution, and it goes on. This one's interesting. Another purpose of this enterprise, securing absolute loyalty from members of the Combs Enterprise, including through acts of violence and threats. And that, again, is something that we heard, particularly in the Rodney Jones lawsuit, that he was allegedly threatened by the defendant. And then finally, the last purpose, protecting the Combs Enterprise and its members and associates, including Combs, from detection and prosecution by law enforcement authorities through acts of intimidation, manipulation, bribery,
episode.
and threats of retaliation. So that
Why
is
did
essentially
someone-
saying obstruction of justice, right?
Hispanic
Okay.
Heritage Month. Why did
Now,
some-
the means and methods of the enterprise. How did they do this? It says among
They
the
even talk
means and
about
methods by Sean
when they
Combs, the
interviewed
defendant and other
Rodney, yeah.
members. They used,
founder is
conduct and
giving
participate in the
something
conduct of the
along
affairs
the
of the
service
Combs
of Germany.
Enterprise. And there's a lot here. I'm not going to go through everything,
Do a
but it
deep dive.
basically says One example, Combs and other members of the associates wielded the power and prestige of Combs' role at the Combs business to intimidate, threaten, and lure female victims into Combs' orbit, often under the pretense of a romantic relationship. Combs then used force, threats of force, coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sex acts with male commercial sex workers. This is where they talk about the freak-offs. And they go into a little bit more detail about the freak-offs. During freak-offs, Combs distributed a variety of controlled substances to victims, in part to keep the victims obedient and compliant. Sometimes, unbeknownst to the victims, Combs kept videos he filmed of victims engaging in sex acts with commercial sex workers. Makes me wonder if that was what they obtained in those raids. Goes on, members and associates of Combs Enterprise facilitated the freak-offs by booking hotel rooms for the freak-offs, stocking the hotel rooms in advance with the required freak-off supplies, including controlled substances, baby oil, lubricant,
So a lot
extra
of you have
linens,
listened to my
lighting,
podcast. Not really
cleaning the
overwhelming,
hotel
but,
rooms
like,
after the freak-offs, try to
I'm used to getting
mitigate
maybe
room
like
damage, arranging for travel for
50,
victims,
60
commercial sex
listens.
workers, and Combs. So honestly, you're
So
talking about
far
an
I have
organization here,
3,000.
an organized effort to facilitate these alleged crimes. Combs subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse to cause the victims to engage in freak-offs. He maintained control over his victims. And again, there's a lot more here where they talk about this. This one. So this was important too, because we knew that there were allegations of alleged illegal firearms possession. Members and associates of the Combs Enterprise, including Combs security personnel, at times carried firearms. On more than one occasion, Combs himself
a lot of you have
carried
listened
or
to my
brandished
podcast.
firearms
Thank
to
you
intimidate
so
and threaten
much. If you
others, including
haven't-
victims of and witnesses to his abuse. In or about March of 2024, during searches of Combs' residence in Miami, Florida. Is this fire alarm that important? Come on, guys. I'm going over the Combs indictment here. I think we're fine. But anyway, it says in or about March 2024, during searches of Combs' residence in Miami, Florida, and Los Angeles, California, law enforcement seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers, as well as a drum magazine. Now, if you have been following us on Sidebar, you've been following us on Law and Crime, you know that that is now one of the charges facing the second potential attempted assassination of Donald Trump. Ryan Ralph, in that case, has been charged with the federal crime of possessing a firearm that had the obliterated serial numbers. So, again, while Sean Combs isn't charged with this directly, it is part of the underlying criminal conspiracy, the racketeering case. I'm going to go a little bit more forward here. So he talks a little bit more employees, witnesses to his abuse, or others threatened Combs' authority or reputation. Basically, how he wielded power and influence to get people to do what he wants. Now, this is the section that talks about the racketeering conspiracy. From at least in or about 2008 through on or about the date of the filing of this indictment in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, the defendant and others, known and unknown, being persons employed by and associated with the Combs Enterprises. This is more of a legal definition about what racketeering is. It basically says that's enterprise they engaged in, and the activities affected interstate and foreign commerce, and knowingly combined, conspired, confederated, and agreed together. You need that agreement, and with each other to violate the racketeering laws of the United States. So there needs to be an agreement to violate the law, that was to conduct and participate directly and indirectly in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs Enterprises through a pattern of racketeering activity. And it consists of, and this is where they have multiple different examples of the crime. So multiple acts involving kidnapping, chargeable under the following provisions of state law. Multiple acts involving arson. Multiple acts indicted under Title 18 relating to tampering with a witness. Multiple acts of forced labor. Multiple acts related to sex trafficking. So these are all these predicate crimes that I talked about when you're trying to prove racketeering. The same thing was charged in the R. Kelly case. You recall with racketeering, he was charged with respect to underlying crimes of forced labor and things of that nature. So again, very similar. In terms of drug offenses, multiple offenses here involving the possession with intent to distribute or distribution of narcotics, and they go through a list of them, including meth. It was a part of the conspiracy that Sean Combs agreed with a conspirator to commit at least 2 acts of racketeering activity. You need at least 2 acts within the course of a 10-year span to ultimately be found guilty of racketeering. And this is a special section. Notice of special sentencing factor. From at least in or about 2009 up to and including in or about 2018 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, as part of his agreement to conduct and participate in the conduct of the affairs of the Combs enterprise through a pattern of racketeering activity, the defendant agreed to, in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce, knowingly recruit, entice, harbor, transport, provide, obtain, and advertise, maintain, patronize, and solicit by any means a person knowing and in reckless disregard of the fact that means of force, threats of force, fraud, and coercion, this is described in a specific code, any combination of such means would be used to cause the person to engage in a commercial sex act. So it's kind of a sex trafficking allegation there, and I believe, and I don't want to misstate here, and I'm going to look it up real quickly, I believe that this is actually a violation that could carry 20 years in prison. I'm just confirming it right now. This is the racketeering conspiracy. I'll get back to that and double check it. But that was all. Everything I just went through was count 1 in the indictment. Count 1. So now here is count 2. Sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, victim 1. Now, we don't know who victim 1 is. That person has not been identified. But it says, from at least in or about 2009 up into and including in or about 2018 in the Southern District of New York, the defendant in and affecting interstate and foreign commerce, and it goes through the definition of what sex trafficking is, by means of force, threats of force, fraud, coercion, as described in the U.S. Code, any combination, would be used to cause the person to engage in a commercial sex act, and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused the same person, Combs recruited, enticed, harbored, transported, and maintained a person, and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused victim 1 to engage in commercial sex acts. So again, we do not know who this person is. We can take guesses as who they are, but you have to go through a number of these lawsuits. By the way, assuming that one of these people who have filed a lawsuit against him is victim 1, could it be someone else?
Okay, Fred, time to find our perfect apartment on Zillow. Don't worry, change will be good. Nice. Hey, this one really feels like home.
Zillions of apartments, one way home. Zillow Rentals.
Whatever it is that pulls you in, Yamaha is here to elevate every moment and bring you closer to where you need to be. That's the power of the water.
New models now in stock and ready to go with lots to choose at MarineMax in Greenville.
We don't know. Count 3, transportation to engage in prostitution. It's also a kind of sex trafficking charge. From at least in or about 2009 up into and including in or about 2004, the defendant knowingly transported an individual in interstate and foreign commerce with intent that the individual engage in prostitution and attempted, aided, and abetted, and willfully caused the same. To wit, Combs transported, aided, abetted, and willfully caused the transportation of female victims and commercial sex workers in interstate and foreign commerce on multiple occasions with the intent that they engage in prostitution. So again, that's a separate crime. I want to double check these, but I believe these could carry 10 years in prison. And then finally, so those are the 3 counts in the indictment. You have these 2 sex trafficking related charges, and then you have the racketeering charge. And then finally, it ends with the forfeiture allegations. You see this a lot in criminal indictments. It's basically suggesting that if you lose this case, if you are convicted, you will have to forfeit over personal property over to the government. As a result of committing the offense alleged in count 1 of this indictment, the defendant shall forfeit to the United States any and all interest the defendant acquired or maintained in violation of the U.S. Code, any and all interest in, securities of, claims against, contract rights, and it goes on, or source of influence over the enterprise named and described herein. So basically, if you profited off of the criminal enterprise, you will have to disgorge those profits, which is very interesting because they are talking about him engaging in an enterprise that made money, that was involved in the music and entertainment industry, but it was also involved in narcotics and different possession as well. Now, it says, as a result of committing the offense alleged in count 2 of this indictment, the defendant shall forfeit to the United States. And that's pretty much it. You have a couple more provisions, but that's a good synopsis of what you're seeing in this indictment right here. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back. We have a lot more coverage here on Long Crime. Stay with us.
When the sawdust settles and the engine finally roars, the thing you care about most is a job well done. But when you get your tools from Harbor Freight, something about the job feels a little different. Your wallet. Because we believe no matter what you're working on, you need high-quality tools at a great price. And that's what we're all about. Whatever you do it for less at Harbor Freight.
Let's go ahead and listen to the U.S.
Morning,
Attorney
everyone.
for New York.
My name is Damian Williams, and I'm the U.S. Attorney here in the Southern District of New York. Today I'm announcing the unsealing of a 3-count indictment, charging Sean Combs with racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, interstate transportation for prostitution. The indictment alleges that between at least 2008 and the present, Combs abused, threatened, and coerced victims to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation, and conceal his conduct. As alleged in the indictment, to carry out this conduct, Sean Combs led and participated in a racketeering conspiracy that used the business empire he controlled to carry out criminal activity, including sex trafficking, forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery, and the obstruction of justice. Let me say a little bit more about the charges. The indictment alleges that Combs abused and exploited women and other people for years, and in a variety of ways. As alleged, Combs used force, threats of force, and coercion to cause victims to engage in extended sexual performances with male commercial sex workers, some of whom he transported or caused to be transported over state lines. Combs allegedly planned and controlled the sex performances, which he called freak-offs, and he often electronically recorded them. The freak-offs sometimes lasted days at a time, involved multiple commercial sex workers, and often involved a variety of narcotics, such as ketamine, ecstasy, and GHB, which Combs distributed to the victims to keep them obedient and compliant. As alleged, when Combs didn't get his way, he was violent, and he subjected victims to physical, emotional, and verbal abuse so that they would participate in the freak-offs, and that Combs hit, kicked, threw objects at, and dragged victims, at times by their hair. On one occasion in March of 2016, that conduct was captured on video and later reported in the media. Specifically, Combs kicked, dragged, and threw a vase at a victim in a Los Angeles hotel when the victim was attempting to flee. As alleged, these assaults often resulted in injuries to the victims, which took days or weeks to heal.
It takes a rebel to make something beautiful. Beauty takes courage.
In addition to the violence, the indictment alleges that Combs threatened and coerced victims to get them to participate in the freak-offs. He used the embarrassing and sensitive recordings he made of the freak-offs as collateral against the victims. And the indictment alleges that he maintained control over the victims in several ways, including by giving them drugs, by giving and threatening to take away financial support or housing, by promising them career opportunities, by monitoring their whereabouts, and even by dictating their physical appearance. Because of all of this, the indictment alleges that the victims did not believe they could refuse Combs without risking their security or facing more abuse. The indictment also alleges other acts of violence undertaken by Combs and others, including violence against witnesses to his abuse, kidnapping, and arson. The indictment alleges that on more than one occasion, Combs carried or brandished firearms to intimidate and threaten victims and witnesses. Now, Combs did not do this all on his own. As I mentioned, Combs has been charged with RICO conspiracy. He used his business and employees of that business and other close associates to get his way. Those individuals allegedly included high-ranking supervisors in the business, personal assistants, security staff, and household staff. The indictment alleges that those individuals facilitated the freak-offs. They booked the hotel rooms and stocked them with the supplies, including drugs, baby oil, personal lubricant, extra linens, and lighting. When the hotel rooms got damaged, they helped clean it up. They arranged for victims and commercial sex workers to travel for the freak-offs, and they delivered large quantities of cash to Combs to pay for the commercial sex workers. The indictment also alleges that they helped Combs cover up his crimes. During the March 2016 incident at the LA hotel that I mentioned earlier, a member of the hotel security staff intervened, and Combs attempted to bribe the staff member with a stack of cash to make sure that what happened was kept quiet. And as the indictment alleges, in late 2023, after public allegations were made about Combs' crimes, he and others pressured witnesses and victims to stay silent, including by making phone calls to witnesses and victims and giving them a false narrative of what they had experienced. And as alleged, Combs used others to help conceal his abuse by monitoring and preventing victims from leaving a location in order to hide their injuries, or by locating and contacting a victim who had attempted to flee. As part of this investigation, in March of this year, special agents from HSI executed search warrants at Combs' residences in Miami and Los Angeles. They also executed a warrant for Combs' electronic devices. During those searches, agents seized evidence of the crimes charged in this indictment. They seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 defaced AR-15s and a large capacity drum magazine. They also seized evidence of the freak-offs, electronic devices that contain images and videos of the freak-offs with multiple victims. And they seized cases and cases of the kinds of personal lubricant and baby oil that Combs' staff allegedly used to stock hotel rooms for the freak-offs. More than 1,000 bottles
registration
altogether.
every single day. Check your
Here are some
voter
of the items
registration
that
every
we
single day.
recovered during the searches.
Check your voter registration every single day.
As you can see here, this is a drum magazine, large capacity, and it contains, I believe, 59 rounds. I mentioned as well, we recovered 3 AR-15s. This is a close-up shot of one of the AR-15s, and you can see right here, the serial number has been thoroughly defaced. Another picture of more ammunition and parts of 2 AR-15s right there. Now, I want to be clear about 2 things. First, this office is determined to investigate and prosecute anyone who engages in sex trafficking, no matter how powerful or wealthy or famous you may be. No one should doubt our commitment on that. A year ago, Sean Combs stood in Times Square and was handed a key to New York City. Today, he's been indicted and will face justice in the Southern District of New York. Second, we are not done. This investigation is ongoing, and I encourage anyone with information about this case to come forward and to do it quickly. Anyone with information can call 1-877-4HSI-TIP. I want to express my deep appreciation for the victims and witnesses who have used their voices and helped bring this criminal conduct to light. We would not be here without them. I also want to thank the dedicated case agents on the HSI Trafficking in Person Squad in New York. They have been with us since day one and have worked tirelessly on this investigation. They will continue to be invaluable partners to us. I also want to thank the incredible agents and analysts from SDNY who have also provided tremendous assistance on this case. I'm deeply grateful for their continued work. And finally, I want to thank the outstanding career prosecutors from SDNY who are handling this case. Meredith Foster, Emily Johnson, Chrissy Slavic, Madison Smeisler, and Mitzi Steiner, and their supervisors, Jamie Backleeper and Jacqueline Kelly. They are members of the Civil Rights Unit in our criminal division. We created the Civil Rights Unit when I became U.S. Attorney. I am deeply proud of their work on this and so many other cases. I'll now take some questions.
Aaron Katursky, ABC.
Damian, thanks. The indictment describes aggressive, open, violent, hedonistic abuse that you say was recurrent and widely known. Why did it take law enforcement so long to intervene? How many women were victimized by Sean Combs, and how many others were involved?
Look, our investigation is ongoing. We are committed to bringing justice to everyone who's been victimized by the defendant. I can't tell you why it took so long. I think the better focus is on the fact that we are here today. And we are committed to making sure that justice is done. Next question.
Thank you. Julia Ainsley, NBC.
Thank you for doing this. You said we are not done and that Combs did not do this alone. Do you foresee that there could be other charges related to this case?
I'm not taking anything off the table.
Janet Fisher, Newsday.
What's the difference between the sex trafficking and promoting travel for the purpose of prostitution?
Well, there are different crimes with different elements. I don't think we should get into the nitty-gritty of the legal discussion right now, but the sex trafficking, we believe, they're all serious offenses, but the sex trafficking conduct carries some significant penalties, and we are gratified that we were able to bring that charge.
One more coercive than the other?
I'm not going to be able to get into that, but you can look it up, and yes, sex trafficking, especially when it involves coercion or force, is a very serious crime, and it carries significant penalties.
Good afternoon, Darla Miles, ABC7 New York. Thank you for this press conference and for the details. 2 questions. In context of this indictment and the information that was presented to the grand jury, are you able to clarify the number of victims? It's mentioned plural in the indictment, but can you specify the number of victims just for this particular indictment? And secondly, can you provide details about the alleged arson?
Unfortunately, I'm not able to provide either. The number of victims, you are correct. We are intentional in saying multiple. The details of the arson incident are limited to what we have in the indictment and also the detention letter that we filed, which contains more details than the indictment does at various points, but we don't have anything more beyond that. Next question.
Lynn Tran, CNN.
Discover Boating and Progressive present the top safe boating tips. Let's anchor down our knowledge and raise the sail of safety. All hands on deck as we dive into the essential protocols every captain, first mate, passenger, and deckhand should know to fuel up with confidence.
Hey boaters, today I'm going to be going over how to safely refuel your boat. We're sailing through the ins and outs of fueling your boat safely. Let's make sure those boating adventures stay safe and fire-free. Fueling up sounds simple, but it's more than just a fill and go. Gasoline vapors, which are heavier than air, can spread rapidly into your boat's enclosed spaces. How do you detect them? Trust your nose. The sniff method is truly the best way to detect fuel leaks or spillage. Make sure you're securely moored to the dock. Engines switched off. Open flames all extinguished. All the electrics, including the ignition, definitely off to avoid sparking those sneaky vapors. With gasoline in the air, no smoking is crucial. Same for keeping ports, hatches, and doors closed too. Next up, all of our trusted crew and guests should disembark and take a break ashore while you refuel. So how can we avoid fueling fiascos? Only use the right fuel for your boat. And that includes knowing how much ethanol is in your gasoline, especially if you're refueling on land at a gas station. Knowing the amount and type of fuel you need is essential. Misfueling can lead to engine damage, spoiled days on the water, and even void warranties. It might not be covered by your insurance if human error is involved. I always recommend checking your boat and engine owner's manual to match the appropriate fuel type to your boat engine specs. Gasoline and diesel fuels may often contain a blend of ethanol. However, for boats, higher blends of ethanol can affect performance, fuel economy, and even safety. Many newer marine engines can safely use E10, which is 10% ethanol, but always be 100% sure that the fuel you're using is intended for your unique boat. As you start fueling, maintain a firm grasp on that hose nozzle against the fill pipe opening. And remember, it's not about reaching the absolute top. Overfilling can be hazardous, causing spillage or worse. Today's boats use a lot less fuel, and it's important to keep fuel out of the water to ensure that we continue protecting the water that we all cherish. Have a fuel-absorbing cloth ready, especially when removing the nozzle. If you spill, wipe it up immediately. Act quickly to absorb and dispose in designated locations. If a spill happens, report it immediately to the U.S. Coast Guard National Response Center. After fueling, get some good ventilation going around the boat. Open up the ports, hatches, and doors, and check the bilge to ensure it's free of fuel. Turn on your blower for at least 4 minutes, and don't forget that sniff test that we talked about at the start. Now we're good to start the engine. Revive the fun. Now you can reboard your passengers carefully. Finally, untie and set off to enjoy your boating safely. Bearing all these things in mind, fueling up becomes a safe, routine part of our boating adventures. Let's keep our waters safe and enjoy every voyage. Until the next time, see you out here.
Are any of his accomplices or associates under investigation? And additionally, could he face any more charges?
So the investigation is ongoing. That means both as to him and to anyone else who we believe committed the crime with him. Next question.
Juliet Papa.
Hi, good morning from 1010 Wins. Any indication that some of the women or victims here were imprisoned in his residences, and did he have locations where he kept them, and did they were not allowed to leave? And also, he's indicted here, although there were searches and raids in LA, Miami. Why in New York?
Well, I'm biased. I'm the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York. I think that we have an outstanding track record of bringing some of the most impactful, sprawling, complex, difficult sex trafficking, human trafficking, labor trafficking, you name it. The Southern District of New York can do it, and so we're very proud of that. And so the scope and complexity of this investigation isn't something that we ran from, it's something that we embrace, and we will continue to do that. As to your question about whether he imprisoned anyone, all I can say is that, I mentioned this March 2016 incident where something was caught on video, where a victim was attempting to flee, and there was violence that was associated with it. That was at a hotel.
Matthew Lee, Inner City Press.
Thanks a lot. Does your office intend to seek remand, or are you reaching a bail package? And if you're willing, how would you contrast this with the R. Kelly case in EDNY in terms of the elements? Thanks.
So we will be seeking detention. We have filed a letter laying out our reasoning for seeking pretrial detention. I'm not going to be able to expand beyond what's in the letter, but it contains all of the reasoning, and it contains the law as well. There is a presumption of detention in a case like this, and we think that's warranted.
John Anise, New York Daily News.
Thank you. I was hoping to get some more detail about the searches of his residence, the guns, the cases of lubricant, and the videos. Where were they found amongst his residence? Were they all scattered around the houses in one place? I kind of wanted to just get a better picture of how that stuff was found.
Well, look, I think that some of the details that you're seeking are in the detention letter. So, for instance, some of the AR-15s, 2 of the 3 DeFace AR-15s were found in his bedroom closet in Miami, broken down into parts, along with magazines, with ammunition loaded in them. So some of that detail is in the detention letter. Beyond that, I'm not going to be able to get into where other items were stored.
No matter what type of severe asthma you have, Tespire can help you have fewer attacks and relieve your asthma symptoms. Tespire is an add-on treatment for people 12 and over. It is not a rescue medication. Don't take Tespire if you're allergic to.
Ben Kochman, Post.
Hey, thanks for doing this. Your office was the office that had been prosecuting Jeffrey Epstein before he died in custody. I have not read your detention memo yet. It's the first thing I'm going to do after this ends. But Does the memo address, or is your office concerned with Combs's safety in custody, given what happened with Epstein?
So we are concerned with anyone's safety whenever they are detained prior to trial. It's part of our obligations to keep people safe as well. It's part of the criminal justice system. So, but I do not draw any sort of connection between Jeffrey Epstein's suicide and what may or may not happen to any other defendant while they are detained pre-trial. And of course, the decision whether to detain the defendant will be up to a judge. Our position is that pretrial detention is warranted under the law and based on the facts of this case, and I'll leave it at that.
Are some of the prosecutors on this case some of the same prosecutors that had been handling that, or that worked on the Maxwell case?
So I'm not going to get into the staffing. I will say that this team, this group of AUSAs, this incredible group has been working on this case around the clock, and they've had their hands full. Next question.
Gus Rosendale, NBC News.
Good morning, sir. Combs' attorney said that his client has been cooperative with investigators. He said that this morning. I was wondering if you would have a reaction to that.
Let me just say this. I think that generally with increasing frequency, the word cooperative or cooperating has taken on tremendous elasticity and it no longer really bears any relation to what the word means when we use it in a very specific context. So responding to the decision whether to detain the defendant generally in a very specific context. So
plan, can you elaborate on how that came about and why that was?
I'm not going to be able to get into any sort of operational details as to how he was taken into custody and when, denying him his wishes, as we allege, because of the presence of firearms.
To that end, was there any discussion of Mr. Combs surrendering? I understand he was, and
He said that this morning. I was wondering if you would have a reaction to that.
Let me just say this. I think that generally with increasing frequency, the word cooperating, I will say that this team, this group of happen to any other defendant while they are detained pre-trial. And of course, the decision whether to detain the defendant will be up to a judge. Our position is that pretrial detention is warranted under the law and based on the facts of this case, and I'll leave it at that.
Are some of the prosecutors on this case some of the same prosecutors that had been handling that, or that worked on the Maxwell case?
So I'm not going to get into the staffing. I will say that this team, this group of AUSAs, this incredible group has been working on this case around the clock, and they've had their hands full. Next question.
Gus Rosendale, NBC News.
Good morning, sir. Combs' attorney said that his client has been cooperative with investigators. He said that this morning. I was wondering if you would have a reaction to that.
Let me just say this. I think that generally with increasing frequency, the word cooperative or cooperating has taken on tremendous elasticity and it no longer really bears any relation to what the word means when we use it in a very specific context. So responding to lawful process and the like does not qualify as cooperation when we use that term here.
Mike Sisak, AP.
thanks. To that end, was there any discussion of Mr. Combs surrendering? I understand he was taken into custody at a hotel in Manhattan last night, and maybe that wasn't the plan. Can you elaborate on how that came about and why that was?
I'm not going to be able to get into any sort of operational details as to how he was taken into custody and when. He is in custody right now. He will be appearing in court later today.
Was there any discussion of him surrendering, given, they claim he's cooperating?
I'm not going to be able to get into law enforcement tactics or operations. Well, I can't get into the charging decision. It is very meaningful to us that weapons were possessed, as we allege in the indictment. Part of the reason why this conduct was so pervasive and harmful was because victims and others didn't necessarily feel comfortable denying him his wishes, as we allege, because of the presence of firearms. I should leave it there.
Thanks. Last question, Jacob Shamison.
Jacob Shamsian, Business Insider. Thank you. Given that he's the sole defendant in this case and that you allege he's part of a conspiracy that involves members of his companies, do you anticipate a superseding indictment that bring allegations against other members of his companies or other co-conspirators as well?
I can't take anything off the table. Anything is possible. Our investigation is very active and ongoing. And I think a lot of you who cover this office know that when we say such things, that developments are certainly foreseeable, but I cannot predict them sitting here today. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
We have been listening to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York detail some very disturbing and graphic allegations in a newly unsealed indictment, a federal indictment against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. That was Damian Williams. And I want to go ahead and bring in CBS News correspondent Jerika Duncan, who is outside the courthouse. Jerika, what are we learning from this indictment that we didn't already know from many of the civil cases that have been brought against Combs? I understand the difference between civil and criminal. This being criminal. But what revelations have there been in this indictment?
Well, there's so much to discuss, you know, for the U.S. Attorney of the Southern District, Damian Williams, to take as many questions as he did and really lay out what he could with this case gives us a better picture into what evidence they also say they have to make these charges. Again, if you're just tuning in, those charges: racketeering, sex trafficking, and transportation to engage in prostitution. He called what Sean Diddy Combs organized a business empire that he said he controlled using kidnapping, bribery, saying that he exploited people, used force, threats. And when you really understand where all of this comes from, you have to go back to the lawsuit, that civil lawsuit that was fired by Combs's longtime ex-girlfriend. Mr. Williams mentioned that video that would later show up after he settled with her in that civil case, when she was claiming that he sexually assaulted her and beat her. And then we saw evidence of that months later in a 2016 video in a hotel where she is hit, kicked, and dragged. Those were the exact words that he used in this criminal case. Something else worth noting, Lindsay, is what he talked about when referencing what they were able to find when searching the home. He said that they searched and seized evidence, 3 defaced AR-15s, evidence of freak-offs. Again, this was a term used in the civil suit, but now talking about it in the criminal form. He said also that this is not done, that there could be more people that are prosecuted as a result of this. But today, of course, the focus being on Sean Diddy Combs.
And Jerika, many reporters were quick to ask whether any more charges could be coming, because this indictment says that he did not do this alone. He was essentially enabled by the people around him, the apparatus that he built, according to prosecutors, as part of this criminal enterprise, again, according to the indictment, that essentially enabled this behavior and led to a pattern of coercion and intimidation.
Yeah, I mean, he said it again by saying we are not done. He even gave a phone number for people to call if they have any tips, because this is an ongoing investigation, as he said a couple of times. He also talked about other charges not being off the table. One of the first questions, though, I think that many people have had, this is someone who's been so well known, a business entrepreneur, a mogul, for 30 years. And the question was, why did this take so long, and are there any other victims? He would not specify about how many victims there are allegedly, only to say that there's multiple based on that indictment. When it comes to why it took so long, he said the better focus should be that we are here today.
I mean, that is the question. He just got the key to New York City in 2023. He was asked to give it back. He did give it back, and yet here we are. Prosecutors saying that this behavior went on for decades. Jerika, we are expecting to learn more from this detention document that Williams kept mentioning, that they will be trying to seek pre-trial detention. What do we know about what that document will contain and when we might get it?
So we're working on getting that document right now. What I can tell you is that we're hearing that Combs is expected to appear in court now just after 2:30 this afternoon. So we're of course going to keep a close eye on that. As for the pretrial detention, essentially Williams is saying we want him to remain behind bars. We'll look at that document and get back to you in terms of the reasons, but they obviously feel that he's a threat to the public. When asked about his cooperation, he also mentioned that he said the word cooperating has taken on tremendous elasticity and that responding to the law in their eyes is not necessarily cooperating with authorities. So we know that he's going to be in custody, but we do know that they're not going to get into, at least Damian Williams saying they're not going to get into the why and when they took him into custody the way that they did as far as that investigation is concerned. But a lot came out of this. Also, I thought worth mentioning, having covered R. Kelly several times in both trials, he said that he was not going to compare or sort of contrast the two, but we do know that Homeland Security Investigations is the same group that really took on a bulk of the responsibility when it came to R. Kelly. Same group, again, looking at these charges that are also similar in nature when you think about sexual assault and sex trafficking.
Jericka Duncan, thank you so much. We'll see you at the top of the hour. And joining me right now is celebrity attorney Chris Melcher. Chris, obviously, we just heard that press conference. We were talking to you on the front end. Did not think that the U.S. attorney was going to get as graphic as he did because this is so disturbing, but he did. The nature of the allegations are disturbing. Your thoughts after that press conference?
Well, they certainly took their time, and that was a very well-crafted press conference where they were laying out a little bit more detail than we saw in the charging document. And I do have that detention letter, so that's a letter to the judge saying that Diddy should, or Mr. Combs should remain in custody pending trial. So that's pretty unusual. Many times somebody's going to be released on a bond. His attorney, according to that detention letter, had offered a $50 million bond to secure Mr. Combs' attendance at trial and also electronic monitoring. The government's saying that's not sufficient. That's not enough money to really dissuade Diddy from fleeing. And more importantly, it's alleged that he is a danger to the community, that he could dissuade witnesses from testifying. So what they're asking is that he be held in custody. He's in custody right now and they don't want him released. The judge will have to decide that, or magistrate, I should say, will decide that later today. But these are I mean, the conduct is depraved, multiple victims. And what is most significant to me is that these events were allegedly recorded and the government has those recordings. That's going to make it extremely difficult if for Diddy to defend himself if those recordings show coercion or violence.
Important point there. Chris, according to the indictment, law enforcement seized firearms and ammunition, including 3 AR-15s with defaced serial numbers and a drum magazine. How will that play in? We know as part of the allegations, they say that Combs regularly carried and even brandished weapons to create an atmosphere of intimidation.
Well, that is part of this allegation, that these women unfortunately became part of his orbit because he's famous, and that was his way of kind of preying on these folks. But then when they realized what was going on and wanted to escape, that he used threats and intimidation. And the allegation is weapons were displayed. And so we did see some weapons. Of course, it can be legal to own weapons in the U.S., but these were high-capacity magazines or defaced serial numbers. So depending on where those weapons were possessed, that could make it illegal and kind of demonstrate the intimidation or fear that allegedly was used against these women. We definitely saw that in the Cassie video, the 2016 hotel surveillance video. And I would note that Diddy initially denied that. He said she was looking for a payday, and that and then when we saw that video, we know that was untrue. So he is in a very difficult spot.
There's nothing more powerful than you making your thing happen, really going for it, doing business on your terms, giving it your all, making a difference, and loving what you do. Every every single day. Feeling fearless, fulfilled, free. When there's nothing holding you back, what would your thing be?
These mushrooms make you feel better. Like, a lot better. These mushrooms make you feel better by keeping you calm and helping you focus. They keep you stress-free, but sharp enough to get things done. These mushrooms help reduce bloat and improve your digestion, so you can trust your gut instead of worrying about it. These mushrooms make you feel better. They boost your energy so you can embrace the day and help ease the aches and pains so you can get up and do it again tomorrow. So to recap, these mushrooms keep you healthy and energized, help your gut feel better and sharpen your focus while remaining calm. Oh, by the way, they taste good too. Whew. Someone should make a coffee out of this stuff. Rise. Feel better.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir G2. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. If it's coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center via one of these multiple screens you see behind me,